Afternoon everybody, Silverbolt here. Not back for a Transformers review, going to be doing something a little bit different. The Sunday of course marks the 10th anniversary of the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers in New York, most commonly referred to as 9/11. One of the most influential events in modern day history, has spawned, naturally being Americans, movies, conspiracy theorists. It spawned wars, it spawned invasions, it spawned debates about ethics and the Muslims. But you know what? To those of us who aren't, politically in power or anything like that, it spawned a moment when the entire world held its breath in collective horror. And the purpose of this video is for those people who watch it, and obviously those people who want to post your memory of 9/11 and what you were doing at the time, assuming that you are, old enough to remember it. But 9/11 is one of three events that I can recall exactly what I was doing at the time. The other two being the 7/7 bombings in London and the death of Princess Diana, of which I'm old enough to distinctly remember all three. So the idea behind this video is, for me, I'll tell you what I was doing at the time, and for everybody else who wants to watch this video, to put it as a video response to this, as to what you were doing at the time that you found out that that awful thing had happened in New York City. And it can be our little way of remembering it, because it affected everybody, in some way or another. Whether you were shocked, whether you were horrified, angered, depressed. Well, I think we all went through something along those lines. I mean, it was an absolute horrendous waste of life. A completely brutal one that shook America to its very core, that hadn't been seen since Pearl Harbor. But on September the 11th, 2001, I was still living in Ireland, and I had my own place in Ireland, and it was my day off from work, and I remember turning the TV on, and I remember that I wanted to watch Catchphrase, the TV show Catchphrase, which was still being shown in Ireland at this point. I don't know if England had lost it at this point, but Roy Walker was still hosting Catchphrase, and I wanted to watch Catchphrase. And I turned on UTV, which is Ulster Television, which is the Irish equivalent of ITV. And seeing this footage about the Twin Towers in New York, and I will admit, at this point, I'd barely heard of the Twin Towers. I couldn't have picked them out from a lineup between that and the Empire. I wouldn't know the Empire State Building, but I wouldn't have been able to tell them apart from any other different skyscraper in New York. I mean, at this point, I didn't even have the internet in my own home. And my first thoughts was, what film is this? I thought it was a film. I didn't think it was real. I didn't believe that it was real at all. It never crossed my mind that what I was actually looking at was real life. And I remember watching it, and I saw the footage of when I missed seeing the first plane go in, but I saw the footage of the second plane going straight into the Twin Towers. And at that point I still didn't click that it was that it wasn't a film. I thought I was watching a news bulletin, like something from Independence Day or something like that. So I changed over to Radio Telefís 1, RTE1, Radio Television Ireland, and that had the exact same footage on it. The exact same footage. And I'm thinking to myself, I remember thinking this, hang on a second. Two TV shows showing the same film at the exact same time. Sorry, two TV stations showing the exact same film at the exact same time. That makes no sense whatsoever. And then I flipped to RTE2. then I went to BBC One. We had BBC One in Roscommon. It generally was god-awful reception, because we didn't have anything like cable or Freeview or anything back in them days. God, I'm old enough to say back in them days. Ugh. But yeah, so I checked, and BBC One again had this footage, and so did Channel 4. And then it occurred to me that this was real, and I started paying attention to the news channels. And it's like, and I remember the news reporter on, I can't quite remember what channel it was. I think it was RT1, because RT1 would give you the clearest reception, saying, "My God, we've got reports of a second plane hitting." And I suddenly realised that this was the footage that I'd just seen a couple of minutes ago. Was this second plane hitting the Twin Towers? And I don't know what it was, but it made me look outside my window at this particular moment in time, and I saw someone I work with, Avril, walking down Lanesborough Street. And I jumped up and I ran out my front door and I shouted, she was on the other side of the street, and I shouted across the street to her, and I said, "Someone's just, a plane's flown into the two towers." And she went, "What?" And I was nodding. And she carried on back down to work, and I know they all turned the TV on because of course we all heard about it and we were all talking about it, and that was the first time that I'd heard of it. And I'm a West of Ireland country boy, very small town community. I didn't know that things like huge major cities pretty much existed. There was all them city folk, and I was just a culture bogger. So it was, and Ireland in the 90s was a very insular country. We had the Celtic Tiger, that was booming and everything was brilliant. But outside the major cities, well, we didn't care about things like that. That didn't matter to us. So for me to have something like that thrust upon me, I don't think I'd ever heard the word Muslim or Islam in a conversation more than 5 times my entire life. So, seeing things like this, and then it coming out that it was Al Qaeda that was, it was Al Qaeda that was responsible for it, and then the public, and of course it dominated the news for months afterwards. For months afterwards, it dominated the news. Understandably, the same as 7/7 did, and Diana's death did, and the start of the war in Iraq, and then we had the protests in New York, the Investigate 9/11 parades, and you'd be watching the news of these people walking through New York who wanted answers to what had happened at 9/11, and that it was a Bush conspiracy and the Bush government had orchestrated and all that, and the division between the people, because you heard other random people calling them traitor for asking questions about it, but it was such a profound moment. For a group of people to do that, to show that they were. To have that kind of brutally cruel disregard for human life was something that was overwhelming to me. In the west of Ireland, well, in Ireland at this point, the outside world wasn't really a problem because we had our own problems. I lived towards the end of the time of the Troubles. I didn't want to go to Northern Ireland. I remember my grandparents driving up when I was about 15, and myself and my grandparents drove up to Enniskillen, which isn't exactly the north of Ireland. You're not talking centre of Catholic and Protestant war zones in Belfast. And I was afraid that having a Republican number plate, a Republic of Ireland number plate, which are very, very different to Northern Ireland English number plates, because Northern Ireland English number plates are virtually identical. They just have one letter positioning switched round in them. Because one's 4 and 3 on the registration, and the other's 3 and 4 on the registration. But Ireland's very, very different, and it's very, very clear that it's from the Republic of Ireland. And I was afraid we were going to get blown up. So that was the kind of things that we had in our time, and I'm saying in our time again, blimey heck. But in the 1990s, we were still focusing on the troubles that were in the north, and the troubles with the IRA and the UVF, and the peace talks and all that. So, the hear of the big outside, big bad world that said, all of a sudden this has happened. And it was such a massive event, because Ireland has always had very close ties to America. Going back well before modern days to the times of the famine, and even before that, we've always had very close ties to the US. We used to brag about it, said no one will ever dare invade Ireland because there's no way in hell America would ever let them. But there we go. But even though we had such close relations to the US, it was never something that we saw. It was never something that we paid a lot of attention to in Roscommon. I don't know if I'm getting my point across very well here, but in the west of Ireland, much more so than maybe the other provinces. So the west of Ireland, which comprised the province of Connacht, was very, very insular. Very insular. We had tourists come over, and Ireland, the west of Ireland, was in some regards the real Ireland. There was a woman, to put it into some kind of perspective, there was a woman that lived down by me that didn't have running water in her house. She had an outhouse, and she used to draw water from a pump. Okay, she was about 70 years of age, and she was batshit crazy back in those days. I think she's still alive, actually. I don't think she's actually died. But to the best of my knowledge, she still lives in a house that had no running water. She never had a phone. That's, can you can't imagine in a first world country a house that doesn't have running water. She cooked her meals over a peat burning stove. Over here they're called Argas, and they're really expensive. Back in Ireland, they're two a penny. Okay, they're not cheap because they're cast iron, but solid stove cookers were well done. When I was 11, 12, 13, my grandparents cooked on a peat burning, stove. It was practically, it was medieval. But it was a very, very insular country in that we never looked outside our borders. It's a strange one to explain unless you know small town mentality. And it was one of them ones. So when this happened, when all this exploded, and it just opened my eyes to such a degree to the outside world that it was unbelievable, and it was just, it was one of those events. It was just something that happened. I mean, it was an absolute horrendous moment. I mean, I had family that lived in New York, and all of a sudden my grandparents were ringing them to make sure, are you all right? Despite these were people they'd speak to maybe once a year at Christmas, or they'd give them a ring on, religious holidays. But they lived in New York, but they wouldn't speak to them. All of a sudden, it was a mad panic to talk to them, to see, are they all right? They all were. I think the worst that happened, the relatives that happened, I think one of my cousins, one of their friends was in the trade centre or something like that. But I think a lot of people have somebody who they know, or they know, or a friend of a friend of a friend who was, all involved in all that. And it was just an horrendous loss of life. It was, and I'm sure there's many people that agree with me, it was something that shocked those of us to our very, very core. Because bear in mind, we'd never seen anything like that. I mean, people in my age range, so, 25 to 35, we don't really have huge recollections of things like the Falklands War, which happened when, we were very young. And we'd certainly never seen war to that degree before. And, being Irish, we certainly hadn't seen anything like that, because as Ed Burns says, we're a bunch of war-dodging fucks. So it was something very, very powerful for us to witness, to see something like that, to open our eyes and to slap us round the faces with something like that, with such a brutal, brutal crime. I remember the conversations we were having in work about it. What could happen? Could this start? Could this bring about World War III? Could this start us? Could this start a new war? What's going to happen when everybody gets dragged into it? Obviously, that didn't happen. So, but yeah, this video is just something to say in regards to it, so that it does. Crimes like that should not and will not be forgotten. But as long as that people are around who remember them, such a thing happened. It was a brutal crime, and those people that were involved in it, the Al Qaeda that did it, it just goes to show the mindset of some people who use religion as an excuse for their fanaticism. And of course now you can't go, you can't go 10 feet without hearing about more the problems of Muslamification and Islamic ray guns and Shiriru law and all that kind of bollocks. So, it woke up too much for very often too much for the wrong reasons. There we go. But yes, that's my take on it. As I said, just post your videos, post your responses of where you were and what you were doing when you heard about this event, when you heard about this atrocity that was committed 10 years ago this weekend. So, but it's my take anyway. But for now, this is Silverbolts.